You made a mistake coming here.
Welcome to Rock Paper Shotgun, where today we're stepping into a dog-eat-dog world where desperate times force people to desperate measures and cruel overlords mess with the fates of the common man. But enough about the Epic Games Store exclusivity deal, I want to talk about Metro Exodus. More specifically, I'm here to tell you why I think it's the best Metro yet, and the perfect culmination of Artyom's story. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that it's the best single-player first-person shooter I've played in a few years. At a time where everyone is going Battle Royale crazy, 4A games have stuck to their guns, their weird hand-pumped gas guns, and delivered their most ambitious solo adventure yet. Forget 100 people battling for supremacy, I'm not sure you'll meet 100 people in the entire game. Although these new humanimal enemies would be amazing at PUBG, camouflage to die for. Before we pop on our gas masks and step out into the wilderness, a couple of quick things. I will try and keep this as spoiler-free as possible, there won't be any cutscenes or story details. And if you do enjoy the video, I'd love it if you were to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. To everyone who does, I raise a glass of impressively physics-enabled alcoholic beverage. And to those that don't, you only get a bitter dose of Fartazen. God knows what Fartazen cures. Anyway, let's get on with it. The first reason I love Exodus kind of applies to the wider series. To me, Metro is the opposite of a power fantasy, which is what most games boringly adhere to. Metro is a struggle fantasy, a game that revels in the toil of a decaying world. It's a world so harsh and unforgiving, even the rotting landscapes are decorated with paintings of rotting landscapes. Traditionally, Metro consigns you to cramped tunnels, lit with a flashlight that has to be cranked for power every few minutes. And when you do get out into the light, the air is so toxic, you're forced to wear a gas mask, meaning you can't really see all that amazing art design. Oh, and those gulping breaths aren't gasps of wonder at the majestic Soviet architecture. That's you suffocating because you forgot to manually change your air filter. No, Metro doesn't shepherd you to the end credits, and Exodus is true to this. It repeats all the awkward mechanics established over 2 games, but adds fun new ones, like holding up your map to get your bearings, very Far Cry 2, which is another masterpiece of deliberately unfriendly game design, or you get weapons clogging with dirt to increase the chance of jamming. And even though it's a bit silly, I quite like that tumbleweeds throw twigs straight onto your eyeballs. It all combines to conjure this immersive, hard-edged world.
Martin, don't forget your backpack. It's a new model.
The best change is swapping currency for crafting. Instead of exchanging bullets for supplies, you use your backpack to whip up air filters, health packs or basic ammunition. You're constantly weighing your needs. Do you hold back chemicals for an emergency air filter? Is a Tikkar flame capsule worth more than 3 medikits? Yes, you had to make similar calls when buying goods in previous games, but those decisions were limited to metro stations dotted throughout the story. With a craft bench on your back at all times, you're free to make bad decisions whenever you want, and there's a greater tension because of it. A question I've seen a lot in the comments is whether Metro's oppressive vibe can exist outside of the claustrophobic setting of Moscow's underground. Exodus does take us to plenty of tunnels, but the meat of the story is spent in 3 larger sandbox areas. But don't think of these maps as traditional open worlds. While bigger and more free-flowing than before, there are no lines of broken cars penning us in here. There are plenty of tricks to focus the storytelling. In the boglands of the Volga River, for example, action is confined to islands navigated by rowboats, with poison-spitting shrimps preventing you from idly exploring. And areas of high toxicity encourage fast sightseeing before you grow a hand out the side of your face or something. Later, in the sinister remnants of a kid's summer camp, steep valley walls and crevices turn a vast forest into a more delicate creep through warring territories. Far from feeling penned in by invisible walls, however, you simply go wherever is logical. When the map is at its most open, in the deserts of the Caspian Sea, a pair of binoculars cut it down to size, pinpointing areas of interest. At first I thought this might spoil the fun of discovery, but it fits with the fiction. You're not meant to be holidaying in this grim world, but getting in and out fast and acting on whatever intel you can scrape together. In the Caspian desert, the binoculars really do guide you away from a lot of empty sand, something I only discovered by wasting time driving my dusty old banger out to the empty shipwrecks. It wasn't time wasted, however. Splatting mutants on the windscreen will always make a trip worth taking. But if the maps are not as open as you might expect, they're open enough for the desired effect. The excitement of seeing an ominous structure on the horizon and wondering what horrors it contains, or the tactical thrill of approaching enemy outposts from any angle. The simple ability to tackle landmarks in an order of your choosing can have big ramifications. Items scavenged in one place might make a huge difference elsewhere. I'm still kicking myself that the last location I cleared out in the Caspian was the hiding place of the sniper scope I really needed for the previous 3 hours of exploration. In moments like this, open maps feel like a perfect fit for a scavenger sim. What's really impressive is how the game keeps you on a retractable dog leash, letting us scamper freely around the maps before reeling us back in when there's something important to show us. I touched on this in my previous video, but only by playing the whole game do you see how well 4A games maintain the scripted thrills that they mastered in 2033 and Last Light. The team has long cited Half-Life as an inspiration for their games, and I'm glad that they haven't totally given up the set-piece driven corridor shooter. With Valve showing zero interest in the genre they perfected, I'm glad someone is carrying the torch, even if you do have to pump it up every 3 bloody minutes. In the context of Exodus, scripted action sometimes means visiting a standalone level. Long-term fans will be pleased to hear that Exodus isn't just sandboxes from start to finish. I'm glad we get to visit more traditional tunnels, if only to see how recent updates to the 4A engine bring them to life. This engine has some of the best lighting I've ever seen, especially if you boost it with RTX ray tracing, and watching a flashlight slice through the dark murk of the underground is a great showcase for the studio's tech team. But I also love the way 4A draw you into interior locations within the sandbox, places where they have total control over space and pacing. At one point I was exploring an old terminal, quite a harmless bit of scavenging, only for it to turn into a huge game of cat and mouse. Or should that be catfish and mouse? When you see what radiation has done to the local wildlife, you'll never be able to flush a goldfish down the toilet again. Likewise, a trip down into buried archives allows 4A to unleash spider bugs for a third time. These scuttling nightmares have to be driven away with your torch as they attack from all angles. In these moments, you could be playing 2033 or Last Light, but then you're only 20 minutes and tens of dead spiders away from bursting back out into the open and left to your own devices again. Compare this to the other open worlds, those of Bethesda, Avalanche, even Rockstar, and you'll see games that handle scale with ease, but sometimes struggle to assert themselves in their more intimate action. Exodus is one of very few games to strike that balance. The only real downside to a more open Metro is that it gives monsters more angles of approach to murder you as you try and go sightseeing, which is bad unless you're attacked by a demon who gives you the kind of view a sightseer dreams of. The answer to this is guns, but not your usual guns. This isn't a world of gleaming military toys, but that actually works in Metro's favour. When you have to carefully nurture a gun, giving it little chemical baths at the workshops and hunting down shiny new parts, it feels that much more fulfilling when it's in your hands, doing the job you prepared it for. Personally, I've always been a sucker for Metro's silenced revolver. As soon as I had one in 2033 and Last Light, I wouldn't swap it for the whole game, especially when I could buy a ×4 scope and deliver headshots with impunity. Once I pieced it together in Exodus, not even a pack of Watchmen could wipe the grin from my face. Of course, other dream weapons are available, and Exodus encourages you to create your own, with a quick modding system that alters the nature of a gun in just a few seconds. What I love about this building system is the way you adapt on the fly, popping on a night vision scope for dark caves, or removing suppressors and adding extra shotgun barrels when you know you're about to meet something big and nasty. Because these parts are scavenged from dropped guns or found at locations around the map, there's a real sense of making do with what you've got. For a good portion of the game, I was stuck using an ill-suited night vision sniper scope out in the burning sun just because I hadn't found the right part. All this would be meaningless if they handled like pea shooters, but with ammo being so scarce, 4A work very hard to make sure each pull of the trigger feels rewarding. Thumping a ball bearing into a goon's head from 100 feet feels as unpleasant as it sounds. Like Anton Chigurh and his bolt gun in No Country for Old Men, it's mechanical and matter of fact. And while noise is generally best avoided, I can't resist the valve rifle. The sound of the shot reverberating across the desert is sexy enough that I don't care if every bandit knows that I'm coming. Of course, guns are only ever one solution in Exodus, and while 4A do force your hand in regular gunfights, you are free to creep through much of the game, even more so than in the previous entries. Metro's stealth is a strange beast, as it's quite rudimentary when you describe it. You have a visibility meter on your wrist and can extinguish most lights in the world to make it your shadowy playground. But that's kind of it. Compared to Deus Ex or Dishonored, it's very bare bones, but if it feels exciting to succeed with these rules, I guess it kinda doesn't matter. I love the quiet approach, watching enemy headlamps to estimate their line of sight, and systematically turning off the lights to make the world more amenable to my lurking ways. Just the sound effect of Artyom blowing out a candle gives me a chill. It's an aggressive puff of air from a pair of lungs that know they're going to be doing some damage in the next few minutes. I like to imagine this is how Batman blows out the candle on his birthday cake, but I do wonder if it's slightly overpowered. The AI is pretty generous, with henchmen often failing to hear nearby attacks, and once you start succeeding in stealth, it can tip the entire stealth scales in your favour, as you'll be using fewer bullets and medkits. Familiarise yourself with the throwing knife, which is an instant kill on most enemies and can be retrieved for endless reuse, and you can go for long stretches without doing any crafting. On one hand, this feels like a reward for smart stealth play, so it didn't really upset me, but I was playing on hardcore difficulty because I wanted to feel the proper squeeze of the survival struggle. But as it is, I often felt one step ahead of the game. I wonder if the inclusion of a quick save is also to blame. The previous games limited you to strict checkpoints, so were a bit harder as a result. Perhaps a ranger playthrough will shut me up, but I didn't fancy taking on the game without HUD elements in my first attempt. One stealth-related idea I did really like is using the day-night cycle to gain an advantage. By sleeping in safe houses, you can jump to night, where guards are more likely to be resting. The flip side is poor visibility, and your flashlight will give you away, and more monsters come out at night. I think the risk-reward element would have some more sting to it if nocturnal stealth didn't give you such a huge advantage, but it's still appreciated. One way to up the difficulty is to attempt a non-lethal run, or as non-lethal a run as you can do outside of forced shootouts. Traditionally, Metro has rewarded forgiveness, if you can call a punch to the head forgiveness, with good and bad endings. Exodus's conclusion is apparently more elastic than good or bad, but it's kinda hard for me to test as I've only played through once. I didn't have another 20 hours to play through again and experiment. But endings aside, you'll probably want to let people live just because they're so rich in character. Metro has always been good at introducing lore without forcing exposition or reading down your throats, and that task is even harder here, as each sandbox area has its own political situation that needs to be introduced and rectified in the brief time that you're there. But it's handled very well. The core story objectives bring you through the basics, and if you take the time to explore the map, you'll meet other characters who pad out the story or allow you to impact its future. I'll always get a kick out of hearing NPCs chat about the things I've been up to elsewhere in the game. Sometimes these decisions can simply be made by holstering your gun at an opportune moment, showing the locals that you're not so bad. This is particularly brilliant in Volga, where a cult of electric-fearing Luddites can be scared witless with your flashlight.
Lucifer's light! Hey, turn that off! It's a sin!
By the time you come to leave each level, you'll have a great sense of what it was about and what the future might hold for it. While part of me is sad that we don't get to see what the Nazis and Reds, the warring faction of Moscow's metro, are up to these days, the amount of story Exodus does get through in 20 hours is pretty impressive. This would be the natural place to slide into story discussion, but that would spoil it. I will say that I think the final stretch of the game will divide opinions. After showing us the potential of the outside world, the game begins to contract over its final few hours. A fitting send-off for this particular series, but one that might annoy people giddy on fresh air. So instead of looking at the broad strokes, I want to celebrate the little touches, as it's in the attention to detail that Metro has always really separated itself from noisier shooters. Things like the lonely rooms of empty houses, telling us little stories about the people who occupied them. I mean, whoever lived in this place really knew how to party. They've got it all. Booze, an accordion, a weird triangle guitar thing, and a big-ass jar of pickles. Or the way that killing enough enemies in an area may force a surrender, letting you walk around the surviving guards, deciding whether to knock them out or execute them horribly. You just don't want to get a bad reputation, so do choose carefully. Or the moments monsters launch themselves at you, letting you see snapping teeth and creepy mouth suckers up close. As horrible as it is, the monster designs are amazing, so it's kind of appreciated. Or there's those brief moments that you decide to throw caution to the wind and pick up a Gatling gun, even though you know it's the least ammo efficient gun in the whole game. You just gotta give it a go just once to hear the mechanical whir of the chamber. Then there are all the bespoke hand animations, from shaking gas cans to listen to precious fuels sloshing inside, or lighting up a cigarette rolled from old newspaper. The fact that the game has several scenes of old friends standing around smoking together is a lovely lived-in touch, even if it is obnoxious to blow smoke clouds into another man's face. And if all else fails, who wouldn't want to indulge the childhood fantasy of yanking on the train's whistle? Just don't do it while two very serious Russians are having a very serious conversation about saving mankind. That wouldn't be smart. It's in these little moments that the magic of what 4A has achieved is felt. Metro Exodus is a survival action game that has expanded its canvas without losing the edge of desperation in all that extra space. And it has held on to an attention to detail that was hard to pull off in the confines of a tunnel, let alone in vast deserts and valleys. There are few shooters that have stretched their formula this far without losing what made the formula work in the first place. As a huge fan of story-driven single-player action games, it's such a relief to see the genre continue with this much skill and care. I hope you found this video review useful and informative, and there's plenty of stuff better illustrated with spoilery gameplay, but you should discover that for yourself. If you've played Metro Exodus yourself, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments, and if you've got questions on what I've said, pop them down there and I will answer them as soon as I can. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll give it a thumbs up and think about subscribing to Rock Paper Shotgun. Why not check out our recent Resident Evil 2 review, or our preview of fellow post-apocalyptic shooter Rage 2. I'd love it if you came back to the channel again for more good stuff on PC gaming. Hopefully we'll see you soon. Bye for now.